Brian Powell of I Run Far here with special guest Dylan Bowman before the 2017 North Face 50. How are you, Dylan?
Excellent. Can't wait.
You are not racing this year, but you are no less excited about this year's race.
I'm more excited than if I were racing.
Why is that?
I've done the race 4 times, and I love the race. And it does take place on my home trails in my hometown, and for that reason, it's always a highlight of the year. And as a fan of the sport, I enjoy spectating and experiencing the race from the other side as much as I enjoy racing it myself.
There's actually, you're not the only notable sort of Bay Area folk person not running this year. I mean, just on, there's no Jorge, there's no Alex Varner. On the women's side, no Magda, no you, you know, like.
It's true, yeah. This is actually maybe the least represented will be in the last 5 or 6 years at least, or at least since I've lived here. Yeah. We are represented by Patty O'Leary, who we spoke to today, who I am very high on going into the race, whose training I've been able to see firsthand.
Yeah, you were talking him up before the race a little bit.
I've been talking him up for the last few weeks to basically anybody who will listen to me, and I'm really excited for Patty. I think he's primed to have a good day.
Who else on the men's side do you think?
The men's race I think is going to be really interesting. Obviously, you can't go past the 2-time defending champ in Zach Miller, and it will be really interesting to see how he bounces back from UTMB, given the fact that it is 3 weeks less preparation time between the 2 races this year. But knowing Zach and having been with him at the North Face Athlete Summit and seeing sort of like how he was training and how seriously he was taking it, I'm sure he's going to be ready to go. And obviously, no one likes to hurt themselves as much as he does. So
that is true.
You know, you can't go past him. Hayden, obviously, who finished just 1 or 2 minutes shy of Zach last year, and what was one of the greatest races of all time, is back, and he seems to be really confident in his training. We just spoke to him. And when you're doing 120, 150 mile weeks, it's like if you can stay healthy, I don't know, it seems difficult to look past somebody like that who puts in that kind of work and is that well prepared.
Who might surprise us for, you know?
Well, beyond Patty, who I think could legitimately finish in the top 5 or even on the podium if there's a lot of carnage caused by the Zach and Hayden train. I think the other guys to look out for are Tim Frericks. I've heard that his training's gone really well. Obviously, he won Transwilcania earlier in the year, which is, you know, basically almost the TNF equivalent in Europe.
And seems to pick his battles too.
He does, yeah.
I mean, in part from a very busy work and life schedule.
Yeah, he seems to be racing intelligently and building up appropriately. So I'll be interested to see how he does. Max King is somebody I'm really interested to see because he's had an amazing season. He started out winning both the USA 50K championships and then chucking out in a course record time, beating Hayden Hawks there. And then had an insane run at Mont Blanc Marathon where he was just a few minutes back of Killian and Steen in 3rd place. And it seems like he's taking it really seriously this year. And he's just a guy who hasn't raced to his potential here yet, and I think it's a course that really, really suits him.
I mean,
and
it's a runner's course.
It's totally a runner's course. So I'd love to see Max, you know, get close to that win or on the podium this year. 2 guys who I'm really interested to see. One, Tate Pullman, young kid.
Totally.
Who has been racing really well over the last couple of years.
I think it's be his 50-mile debut. I could be wrong.
Probably. Yeah. And he's specialized in, I think, more sky racing type stuff. I know I think he won Broken Arrow this year. But he's been consistent in the mountainous type racing. And I think he also did well in the long distance mountain running championship. So I'm really interested to see how he does. You know, he's really young, and, you know, if this is his 50-mile debut, he probably has a good amount to learn, but I could envision him being, you know, in that top 5 range. And then also Nick Elson from British Columbia. Yeah. He's an athlete who always has interested me just because he's a really great mountain runner and he's a ski mountaineer.
It kind of flies under the radar in the U.S. because he hasn't raced in the U.S. a lot. But
Totally
I mean, he's had some really good results. I think up at Squamish, 50 before.
He's won Squamish a couple of times in a time that's commensurate to what Dakota Jones has run on that course, and Dakota's one of the best 50 milers we have. So those are the group of guys who, I'm sort of keeping an eye on. Obviously, there's probably another 7 to 10 you could name who could be in contention.
And the women's race, which, I mean, I think you and I are both pretty damn excited about.
Yeah, so the women's race, as we just talked about with Megan, I think is the most intriguing it's ever been here. And I would love to see it play out in a similar way that the men's race has for the last several years, and that oftentimes there's a pack that is running together and people pushing the pace up front, and just a more kind of aggressive dynamic, which I think we could see this year. Obviously,
that gets hurt a little bit with Ruth Croft being a late pole. Emily is also a DNS, but she's maybe a less aggressive racer than Ruth.
It is too bad that they're not going to be here, because I mean, they're both amazing athletes, and obviously Ruth is coming off maybe the biggest win of her career at Templier. But even with them off the start list, I think the women's race is just as intriguing as the men's, if not more so. Obviously, Ida Nilsson, the defending champ, who really put on a controlled but almost dominating performance last year. With a couple times I saw her out on the course, she looked phenomenal. And I think she was second at Templier.
She was in a long, just an amazing battle with Ruth. So it was she was second, but it was a good on a second.
And then she did the rim to rim run in the Grand Canyon. So assuming she's recovered and feeling good, you can't go past her. And then obviously the champion from the year before, Megan Kimmel, seems to be doing well, having come off a much better training block this year than she did last year. One person who I think could really throw a wrench into the dynamic of the whole race is Megan Roche, who's local runner, who has, I think she's won Way Too Cool 3 or 4 times.
In really fast years and really slow years, early really muddy years.
Near the men's top 10, I think, usually. And she, I think, is naturally a really aggressive racer, so I wouldn't be surprised, even though this is her 50-mile debut, if we see her kind of pushing the pace.
And it's her 50-mile debut, but she's been running some 50Ks for a number of years now, so it's not like she's inexperienced at the sport.
And this is the type of terrain that she just destroys. It's kind of like Way Too Cool. She does a lot of local races where she's frequently on the overall podium. So I think Megan Roche is definitely somebody to look out for, and somebody who could have a big impact on the dynamic of the race. I'm also personally rooting for Stephanie Howe, who had a tough go at UTMB a few months ago, and who I think has been in Nepal for a few 6 weeks or something this fall, and so she's put in good training there. I'd love to see her come back, because this is a type of race that she really excels at, the faster or more runnable type races. Obviously, she's won Western States in the past. She's been on the podium here at least once, I think maybe a couple of times. Claire Gallagher, I think, is somebody to look out for as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy for and when I was thinking about the race, it's easy to remember that she had a rough go at the very end of Western States, but then you have to remember she just crushed CCC. And I spent some time with her last month in
Arizona, and she's motivated, and she always has such a good attitude, and I think that's important going into big races like this. Another person who I think is interesting to watch is Anna-Marie Madden, also from Canada. I think 2 years ago she was 4th, and then she also just had a great race at Templier.
She was battling Emily Forsberg the whole way, and it's just a great run for her there. I mean, and there's a really just great Canadian women's group. I mean, not just her, but Anna Jean, who was 4th last year, wearing a pair of dogs, which for the American crowd is raced 50 miles in Crocs and finished 4th.
Really?
Yes.
You're kidding?
No joke.
No way.
The whole way. And she's legit in, I think she's says she's a little tired, so maybe not racing it so hard. But Marianne Hogan had some really great races early in the year out of Quad Rock, out at Behind the Rocks 50 mile, and could
Speed Goat maybe too.
I think she was there, but yeah, just like kind of just threw herself out there real quick early this year, and has the kind of talent that could be in the mix for the top 5. So
yeah, well, and I've said this to you and to a couple other people, but I'm running the marathon on Saturday, and based on our start time, I'm really hoping to be mixed in somewhere with the top 10 females in a 50-mile race while I'm not there running the marathon. So hopefully I'll have a front row seat.
You'll be sending me some updates along the way. Can you carry your phone, please?
I run far correspondent from the field. Yes.
Yeah, and having just been at the Moab Trail Marathon a couple weeks ago, Renee Metivier, or however you say her name, I've never met her. She ran a really impressive race there to win. She's more than almost a dozen times All-American collegiately, like just super strong runner. Not well known in the trail world yet, but this will be her first 50 mile, and chasing her down. I haven't seen her on the entrance list, but I got a message last night that Sandy Nypaver is racing, and she was less than a minute back of Renee and charging at Moab Trail Marathon. And that's a race that Megan Kimmel has run really well at in previous years, and then come and run really well at. So it's a marathon. It's only a couple weeks before, but pretty good tune-up.
Well, having 2 good additions late to the field will make up for losing Ruth and Emily at least a little bit, but I agree, it'll be interesting to see how both of them perform. Yeah,
and there's the women's field is just stacked. I forgot Annalise Rousset, who's just like a tremendously strong runner from France. So yeah, it's gonna be awesome. Before we go, the course.
Yes.
You live here. I assume you've run across the Golden Gate Bridge. What's that gonna be like? Best case and worst case scenarios.
Well, the bridge specifically, I think they're going to do a good job of controlling the traffic. From what I've heard, there's going to be volunteers up there sort of at least alerting people.
Encouraging maybe.
Approaching runners. If it comes down to something like we saw last year with Zach and Hayden, worst case scenario is, there is a collision or somehow pedestrians affect the dynamic of the battle, but we know that's probably very unlikely. It could be close, but I doubt they're going to be shoulder to shoulder crossing the bridge. And for me, I think it's so cool. It's just such an iconic landmark in the United States, and specifically in the San Francisco Bay Area, that to be able to cross it during an ultra, I think is phenomenal.
How many physical spaces are like that iconic, like globally, that you could actually run on? Maybe you got the Great Wall of China. There's a couple other ones, but
So I think it's really cool. In terms of how it might affect the times of the race, I think the course will run similar to how it did on the old course, not the one last year, which I think was fairly significantly faster, but on the course that we basically ran, from 2008 to 2015, there was a few years with weather-affected courses, but I think the men we're still going to see in the low 6s. I doubt we'll see them go under 6, because removing the out and back on the north end of the course, that was probably, even though it doesn't have a lot of vertical gain or loss, it's one of the slower parts of the course historically, just because you're dodging two-way traffic and you're on a very thin piece of single track, and replacing that with the road section where you're crossing the Golden Gate Bridge, I think that will actually make it a little bit faster, but then adding a little bit of extra mileage and a little bit of extrovert might cancel that out. So I would still expect to see the men again in the low 6s and the women in the low 7s.
Okay. Yeah. In chatting with Patty, I'm kind of looking forward to that last super straight away finish. I mean, just if there is a close race, whether it's for first or
You'll have a
or
visual.
15th.
Yeah, you'll definitely have a visual.
Like, and seeing that, but also, I mean, for the racer, like, it's not like you're winding through the trees and you don't know exactly how far that distance is, linearly.
Yeah, I think it's going to be amazing. I'm really excited about this change that North Face has made to the race and to the course. Hopefully, it'll bring in maybe some people from the city to come to the finish line and bring more awareness to the sport and to the event itself.
I mean, it's been interesting. It's something that's always been talked about with a big race, whether it's in San Francisco or a Front Range or somewhere where there's a big population and you could put together a great trail race. But we really haven't seen that in the U.S. yet, where there's a real buy-in from the community, from the larger community, as there has been, at any race in Europe. Right? So
yeah, I think culturally it's a little bit different, but ideally as the sport continues to grow, we'll start seeing that stuff. And it starts with having creative ideas like having a new finish line at a race like this. So kudos to TNF for putting it together, and you and I are going to have a front row seat.
Right on. Well, thank you for this, and thank you for helping out with the interviews this morning, Dylan.
Heck yeah.